So actually, I want to talk about the parable of the prodigal son. But when I was preparing for the sermon this week, I didn't really pay much attention to the psalm, and I really wish I had, because there's the verse in there: "Do not be like horse or mule, which have no understanding." I'm pretty sure I could come up with a pretty good sermon on "Don't be an ass." And I used to own horses, so I feel like I've got some good illustrations there. Anyway, this story of the prodigal son is one of my favorite stories. I love this story. It feels very personal in a lot of ways. But before we get into it, I want to ask you, and feel free to just answer, why is the son hungry? Why is the son hungry? The one who left. Just shout out an answer.
Like a literal answer?
Yeah, like a literal answer from the story.
Didn't have food.
He didn't have food. That's a good one. That's true. Any other reasons? Why doesn't he have food?
Squandered his money.
He squandered his money. That's right. So, here's an interesting thing. I had a professor in seminary, and he said the answer to this question is really fascinating to him because he used to teach in seminaries around the world. And he said if you've been in different cultures, they see this story very differently. Right? He says in America, if you ask the question, why is the son hungry? Why doesn't he have any food? The usual answer is, well, because he squandered all his money. He says, but in Russia, where he used to teach, he said when you ask this question, they go, because there's a famine. There's no food to be had. And he said if you go to Kenya, where he also taught, and you ask this question, they will say, because he's far away and has no people. He's away from his community. And the fact is, all three of these things are true. Right? Yes, he did squander all his money, so he didn't have any resources, but he did go and get a job. Right? Oh, I spent all my money, that was stupid. He did go and get a job. It's not a very good job, we might call it an entry-level job, feeding the pigs. But he didn't have anyone to take care of him. He was far away from his family. He's just a hired hand. He's not a part of the community. He sort of exists outside of it. And of course, there's a famine. Right? There's really just not a lot of food around to be had. Even if he had money, he probably would have spent it all on trying to buy food in the famine. And the reason I love this story because I think it really speaks to the experience of many people, right, in our world. We are, and this is not a knock on anyone, but as a society, we are very individualistic. We tend to see people's success or failure based in their choices and their actions. That's just kind of who we are as a people. And we tend to judge people who are successful well. It's well shown that generally we prefer people who are wealthy and successful, and we imbue upon them lots of attributes that they may not have, right? Like Bill Gates has a lot of money. He must be really smart. Or, his dad was really rich and he got lucky because he didn't have to get a job. His dad kind of helped him, and he bought his best idea from someone else. And that's what made him rich. So he was more lucky than smart. But yeah, we still attribute these sort of attributes to people who are successful. It's like movie stars. Like, people ask movie stars opinions about things. Why would you ask a movie star their opinion about it? They're really good at lying. That's their job. They pretend to be people they aren't really well. Maybe not the people we want to ask advice. Right? But we also find ourselves oftentimes in situations where we don't have connections. We find ourselves outside of community, marginalized. Right? There's an epidemic of loneliness in America. People report levels of loneliness greater than any they've seen in really the history of taking polls on this. That people have fewer friends they can count on than in the past. And part of that is because, modern life for working people, it makes it really difficult. Like my parents, and probably some of you and your parents, they belong to various organizations. Now, in all honesty, my parents, all the organizations they belonged to revolved around bowling. They bowled a lot. I was raised in a bowling alley, more or less.
You got left at one once.
Yeah, I did get left at the bowling alley. My family, there were 5 kids. I was the youngest by a long shot. Like the next one is like 6 years away. And they were bowling one night, and you know when you go bowling, you drink a little bit. And so my parents left. You know, they herded everybody into our Ford Galaxy 500, and like all 5 kids in the back seat, and they drove home. And they realized I wasn't there. Now, I'm like a year old when this happened. And they're like, oh, better go back to the bowling alley. So they turn around, they go back to the bowling alley, and I'm still like laying down on the bench asleep somewhere. I, of course, have no memory of this, but I've heard the story many, many times. So yeah, right, so they belonged to organizations, and they had connections, and they had friends. And the people don't do that because, you know, work isn't as easy like that. People don't have 9-to-5 jobs as much as they used to. And there's just sort of a sense that people don't want to join things. I mean, we see that here in the church, right? It's really hard to get people to join the church. It's really hard when I was in Rotary to get people to join the Rotary Club. You know, and all of these sort of organizations that require people to give up their time we don't have those connections. And that's why I give thanks to my life in the church, because it is a place where I've been able to make connections with people I probably never would have encountered otherwise. And so it is a real gift. So people, they feel atomized, and people sometimes make poor choices, and they don't have all the resources that they need. But we also find ourselves caught up in things beyond our control, like famine, right? That there are sort of systems. Like in America, we tend to judge people on their individual effort. Right? Like if you didn't escape poverty and become a successful middle-class person, that's on you. Because that person did it. Right? But there are these systems that we all live in that make change really, really, really difficult. Right? We spend a lot of money, for example, on education. And we've tried to make it so that we spend about the same on pupils everywhere across the state, and that's not exactly fair, but I mean, it hasn't exactly equaled out. But you know, they spend a lot per pupil in, say, the city school district. And yet, if you compare their, I don't know, test results to maybe some of the suburban districts, they don't do as well. But the correlation between spending and student achievement is not really very clear. If you really want to know how well the students are going to do or how well a school is going to perform, you can just kind of look at the income level of the parents and their education level. And that's going to tell you a whole lot more than anything else. Right? Because when you're mired in poverty, everything is hard. Right? Every little setback cascades. And so we find ourselves, people stuck in these systems that are really difficult to escape. They're like the famine. They're beyond their control. And they leave them without and in no way to really overcome it. And so we find ourselves in a world where people are isolated, where people are stuck in systems that hold them back, right? And that they don't have connections that they really need and the resources that they really need. And this story that Jesus is telling us is really a story about God's graciousness. Because it's really easy when we find ourselves stuck and alone and without resources to not see the love of God in our lives. And so one of the things that we're called to do as a church is to be like the Father in this story. Right? Because the Father, of course, represents God in some sort of way. And we are called to be like Jesus, the Son of God. That we are meant to emulate him in our lives. That we are meant to be like this Father and to joyously celebrate. And to do what we can to lift up those who have been caught isolated or in systems beyond their control or without resources. That's what we exist for as a church. And it's really easy, I think, a lot of times for church communities, and I don't mean us, but you see it in the wider church, to be like that second son, to sort of resent those who have struggled, who haven't been able to overcome the obstacles that have been put in their path for whatever reason, whether it's through bad choices or just because they got stuck in a bad place in life. Because that can happen to any of us. Like, many of us are like one medical crisis away from bankruptcy. That's just like a fact in America. Many of us struggle with things that are beyond our control. Medical issues, addictions. Things that we have a hard time overcoming. But the church is meant to be a place where people can find connection, where we can help one another as much as we can, where we can show mercy and grace and love. Right? Because the church at its very best is a place where you can show up and be accepted for who you are, as God created you. That you don't have to be or pretend to be something that you aren't. That in all your vulnerability, you can come and be in a place where you feel loved, you feel accepted. That's our goal. That's the place we want to be. That's the people we are striving to become. And I think this is a really great parish, to be honest. I think we do that pretty well. But it's also incumbent upon us to go and find the people. And I've talked about evangelism before, but it's really important, and not just so it feels like there's more people, or because we want like a bigger club or whatever. But because every time we can invite someone to be with us and to join with us, that's one more person that we can love, that we can care for, that we can show that their lives are worthwhile and meaningful. That God created them. They're not an accident, but they were purposeful. So the story of the prodigal son reminds us of how God has been graceful and merciful to us. And hopefully it's an encouragement for us to take that love that we have encountered, that grace that we have been shown, that mercy that has made the difference for us, and share it out into the world. That we can walk through this world as the body of Christ together. Amen.